Happy Halloween, for real. And what better time of the year to talk about my second favorite thing next to video games? Horror movies. Horror is a genre of film that I just cannot stop myself from obsessing over. I love all genres of horror. Slasher, splatter, gothic, monster, you name it. It's just my thing. Horror doesn't have to come from only film. It can come from stories like creepypastas, urban legends, etc. It's a little hard to explain why I like horror so much. It just enhances the experience for people when it's dark and it gets your adrenaline rushing with kills and all that stuff. You ever like something that you just can't explain? Well, welcome to the club. Alright, I would like to talk about the list right before we get into it. This is my list, my opinion only. If you disagree with the list, then that's okay. We all have different opinions on film, especially when it comes to horror. None of this that I say is set in stone or fact. Just want to let you guys know. My opinion. And I'm also setting some boundaries for this list. I'm going to try to do one film per franchise, so it won't mess up the variety of the list. Clear? One last thing, I love every single movie on this list, but if I were to have to choose one movie over the other, this would be it. Alright, let's get into the list. Number 50, Rosemary's Baby. This critically acclaimed 1968 horror classic was a big deal when it first released, grossing over $30 million at the box office, which is a pretty big deal for the 60s. The plot focuses around a woman named Rosemary and her husband who wants to have a baby but moves into a new apartment. Rosemary begins to suspect that her neighbors are occult Satan worshippers. And spoiler alert, she's right.
God is dead! Satan lives!
The Satan worshippers then drug Rosemary and summon none other than the devil in the flesh, raping her and then unknowingly impregnating her with the Antichrist. It's a very creepy and unsettling scene. Rosemary's Baby was directed by many to consider one of the greatest directors in Hollywood, Roman Polanski. In 2014, the film was selected as a preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. Mia Farrow is great as Rosemary Woodhouse. As more as the film progresses, the more Rosemary spirals into madness that these people are out to get her baby boy. But that's the least of our worries. At the climax of the film, Rosemary is forced to confront the fact that her child is not human whatsoever and is the son of Satan. We don't even see the child, other than a quick glimpse of its eyes. But by the horrified expression of Rosemary, our imaginations can only go haywire.
What have you done to it? What have you done to its eyes?
He has his father's eyes.
Rosemary's Baby got a remake turned into a TV show, and in 1978, it got a very obscure sequel made for TV, and it's called Look What's Happened to Rosemary's Baby. I haven't seen the movie, though, or heard anything about it. I like Rosemary's Baby. It's worthy to be on the list in 50th place. The reason why this film is so creepy, I think, is because it looks so normal, but it's absolutely not. It's suspenseful and evil. The satanic concept is done so well and creepy. Roman Polanski did such a good job making this film. Now, the book that Rosemary's Baby is based on has the same name as the movie. It came out 1 year before the movie was released, and it was the highest selling horror novel of the 60s. Number 49, Get Out. Get Out is a 2017 film, and it was the first movie that Jordan Peele ever directed in his career. Believe it or not, the reason why Jordan Peele decided to direct because he was offered the role for the poop emoji in the Emoji Movie and was so offended that he decided to retire acting and make a horror film. Jordan did well on this film, with it winning him an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay in 2018 and becoming the first African American to win an Academy Award. The plot focuses on a man named Chris. When Chris's girlfriend Rose decides that it's time for him to meet her parents and the rest of the family members, they decide to take a trip out to their house. But little does Chris know is that her family takes the term racism to very sickening heights, brainwashing black people for their own sake. The Armitage family really makes your skin crawl because there's no limit on how sick they can be. They even auction Chris off in a sick game of bingo behind his back. And this film has a nicely executed plot twist at the end that I will not spoil here. This is probably the most deranged family I've ever seen in a film, next to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They have absolutely no problem with what they do. They're just pure evil, there's no redeeming qualities about them. Jordan Peele also based this off of his own problems with racism in the world, though I highly doubt any of this happened in real life. Jordan Peele was also inspired by the film we just talked about, Rosemary's Baby. He would also go on to direct other horror movies such as Us, Nope, and even writing the script for the 2021 remake of Candyman. I would talk about this movie more, but I got 48 more movies to go. Get Out is a unique horror film. It's very suspenseful, and you don't know what's going to happen.
Get out. Sorry, man.
Okay.
Get out! Yo! Yeah! Yo, chill, man. Get out! Chill! Chill, man! Chill! Get the fuck out of here!
Number 48, Puppet Master. This is probably the most obscure film on this list. It's about a few people who are trying to survive in a hotel while they're being hunted down by a group of marionettes. And they are being controlled by a man who can telepathically control them without using strings. Thus it gives us the title, Puppet Master. The puppets in this film are very cool and unique. I like how this movie, even though made in the 80s, it still captures the vibe of the 1940s and 50s old horror films. It's a shame that this film is so obscure, because it doesn't deserve to be. It's a good movie. It spawned many sequels, the fourth movie being free on YouTube, for the moment, at least. The last thing I will say about this is if you like 80s horror movies, but you also like 1940s and 50s horror movies, I recommend this. Number 47, Tusk. Tusk was released in 2014 and directed by legendary indie filmmaker Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith makes goofy comedy movies. Even though Tusk starts out as goofy and funny, it slowly spirals into a very disturbing body horror film. Kevin Smith actually based Tusk off of a fictional story he told in his own podcast. Smodcast episode 259, The Walrus and the Carpenter. This is actually the only horror film Kevin Smith ever made. Tusk is about a man named Wallace, played by actor Justin Long, who is some sort of a horror icon himself. Wallace and his friend Teddy run a podcast. Wallace wants to travel all the way to Canada to interview a strange man named Howard, who is played by the iconic Michael Parks. Rest in peace. Oh yeah, and this movie also has an unrecognizable Johnny Depp in it. When Wallace meets Howard, he realizes Howard has a very serious obsession with walruses. So he traps Wallace in his house so he can cut up his body and reform him to become a walrus. The film really seems like a parody of Frankenstein to me, actually. Without the theme of walruses, of course. Michael Parks is great as the psychotic walrus man.
Perfectly. Jesus. What the fuck? But, whilst in the walrus suit, you must be a walrus.
The whole idea of a man turning another man into a walrus is silly, sure, but it is a scary movie, especially when it comes to the body horror. Kevin Smith really does seem to care about his fans. He actually let his fans decide if he was going to make Tusk or not, telling his Twitter followers to tweet #WalrusYes if they wanted to see his story from his podcast adapted into a movie, or #WalrusNo if they did not. Tusk was supposed to be a trilogy. The second movie got released and it's called Yoga Hosers, but the third movie did not due to Kevin Smith having a massive heart attack and immediately wanting to make Jay and Silent Bob reboot. I like how Kevin Smith expanded his genre of making movies and decided to make a horror movie. Tusk is without a doubt one of his that I like a lot, and I do need to watch it again because of how good it is. Number 46, The Omen. This was the last film Richard Donner made before making the Christopher Reeve Superman franchise. The Omen is about a man and a woman named Robert and Catherine. After Catherine gives birth to their son, Robert is told by the nurses that their son has died immediately after birth. So Robert decides to adopt another boy whose mother also died in birth, but doesn't tell Catherine about it. They decided to name the child Damien, but with this being a horror movie, Damien is no ordinary child, and just like Rosemary's Baby, he is the son of Satan.
What God's name are you talking about?
Your son, Mr. Thorne. The son of the devil.
Even though this is just a movie, it does have a lot of bad juju around it, many conspiracies that it is a cursed film. Many strange coincidences occurred. While Gregory Peck, the actor who played Robert, and his screenwriter were in a plane, the plane was struck by lightning, but thankfully both of them survived. Not to mention, Gregory Peck's son also committed suicide 2 months before filming The Omen. Richard Donner was staying at a hotel during the production, and the hotel was bombed by the IRA minutes before he got there, thankfully surviving. Animals were also a big hassle while filming too. They would freak out around the actor who played Damien, such as the animals in the film freak out around Damien. The people watching over the dogs on set were actually bitten by them, biting through their protective gear despite the proper precautions being taken. Another animal keeper on the set was eaten alive by lions only 2 weeks after the completion of The Omen. The creepiest coincidence to me is the death of John Richardson. He was the set designer for the decapitation scene. John and his wife Liz suffered a car accident while shooting a bridge too far. The crash got Liz decapitated. And if that's not a creepy enough coincidence, they crashed near a street sign that said Omen with 2 M's, with the number 66.6 kilometers next to it. Now that's what I call a coincidence. And finally, the actor who played Damien was sentenced to a year in prison for a road rage incident a few years ago. Despite all the bad things that happened behind the film, it's a good movie and deserves to be on the list. Number 45, House of Wax. I'm not talking about the original one titled Mystery of the Wax Museum in 1933, or the 2005 one. I'm talking about the 1953 one starring Vincent Price. This 1953 remake was originally going to be called The Waxworks, but they changed it. This was actually one of the first 3D films. Pretty mind-blowing for 1953, actually. Vincent Price plays a wax artist named Henry. But when Henry's greedy co-worker burns all of his art, he's left crippled from the fire. Even though Henry's sanity is on the edge, he still decides to rebuild his own wax museum with a bunch of other co-workers that he has found. Vincent Price seemed to be a massive horror icon in the 50s and 60s, but of course Henry has his co-workers murder people and then steal their bodies so they can dip them in wax and display them at the museum. Even go to a morgue and steal them. Though Henry's new wax museum gains mass popularity throughout the townsfolk are scared, wondering what's happened to their friends and why they're going missing. The police are also very concerned why dead bodies are going missing at murder scenes, especially at the morgue. But the answer is right under their nose and they just don't know it. I think it's a cool script idea of a man dipping his victims in wax and displaying them at his museum. It's a neat horror movie that even comments on itself at one point, just like Vincent Price said in the film.
I'm rebuilding my exhibition from the ground up. I'm going to give the people what they want. Sensation, horror, shock. Send them out in the streets to tell their friends how wonderful it is to be scared to death.
Number 44, The Hills Have Eyes. The Hills Have Eyes is about a family stranded in a desert in California, but they're being hunted down by a group of cannibals that are actually named after planets. This was the second film of legendary horror director Wes Craven after he made The Last House on the Left. Wes Craven didn't want his second film to be scary, but he couldn't find a producer that didn't want to make a movie without gritty violence. So he made another movie with very gritty violence. To me, every kill in this movie is cringy, but in a good way. This movie also has a very strong sense of paranoia. Just knowing being stranded on a desert, only staying in a trailer, and all these cannibals are up in the hills waiting to eat you, kill you, and take your stuff. Wes Craven also based this movie off of the legend of Shawnee Bean and his clan. Shawnee Bean and his clan was responsible for the murder and cannibalism of more than 1,000 people. Wes Craven also got inspiration from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was one of Wes Craven's favorite films, and both of them being sent around a group of people stranded out in the middle of nowhere and must defend themselves from a group of cannibals. In one scene, the movie actually shows a real dead dog that was found on set, but they didn't kill the dog, they just found it and they just put it in the movie for shock factor. Overall, The Hills Have Eyes is a great movie if you like horror and Wes Craven. Number 43, Signs. I'm not a fan of M. Night Shyamalan, but his take on aliens is good. The plot of Signs is about a retired priest named Graham, who is played by Mel Gibson. He lives on a farm with his children and his brother named Merrill, played by Joaquin Phoenix. Graham becomes very skeptical when he realizes that crop circles are being engraved into his crop fields. He thinks that's just somebody trying to mess with him by destroying his crops, but it's something even more sinister. I've heard some complaints about the cliches in the film, such as one scene where they put tinfoils on their heads because they're afraid that the aliens can read their minds. You barely see the aliens in the movie, which makes Signs way more creepier. Its dread and suspense is off the charts. If you're just getting into horror, then this is a film I recommend to you. Number 42, Final Destination 3. Out of all the films in the Final Destination franchise, I think everyone agrees that the third movie is the best. The Final Destination movies are crazy. Death is literally the villain, and it's alive, killing people, and each protagonist can see the future and predict everyone's deaths. Every death in the Final Destination franchise is so crazy and coincidental that it's almost comedic. Each kill getting more and more wacky and creative. I think the reason why the third movie is the best is because the characters are way more likable, especially the two protagonists. None of the characters are just only there to die, they're there to like. Final Destination 3 captures the nostalgia of the 2000s, while being very violent at the same time. But it's a great horror movie that I recommend. You more or less should watch 1 and 2 first, though. Number 41, Nosferatu. Now we're really going back, all the way back to 1922 to visit the very first adaptation of Dracula, and also the one that is most inaccurate to the book. They never got Bram Stoker's permission to make this movie, so they had to change Dracula's name from Count Dracula to Count Orlok, avoiding copyright. The 1979 remake also didn't get Bram Stoker's permission, but they called him Count Dracula anyway, which is also a good remake if you want to watch that too. This is a silent film. Even though it is inaccurate, it still follows the same idea as the book. The plot revolves around a man named Thomas who is hired to travel all the way to Transylvania to sell the vampire Count Orlok a house in Germany, so he can spread a deadly disease and feast on people's blood. Bram Stoker's estate was so angry that they never got his permission to make this movie that they ordered all copies of the film to be destroyed. Thankfully, many of them survived. But that didn't stop Nosferatu to be regarded as an influential masterpiece of cinema and the horror genre. There are many versions of this film. 2 years ago, it got re-released on Blu-ray for the 100th anniversary edition. It's available to stream on many apps, and it's even for free on YouTube if you want to watch it. Along with the 1979 remake Nosferatu the Vampire, with a Y in it. For some reason, I just prefer this one over the 1979 one. With this one being silent, you can use your imagination a lot. They even made a movie about the making of this film. In 2000, they released a film called Shadow of the Vampire with Willem Dafoe. Not to mention, he's going to be in the second remake coming out this Christmas, and I'm over the moon excited to see that movie. Hell, this movie is so memorable that Count Orlok got his own cameo in SpongeBob.
Wait! If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, Then who was flickering the lights? Nosferatu!
Number 40, The Amityville Horror. To amp up the creep factor, this movie's based on a true story, believe it or not. The Amityville Horror set a new standard for haunted house movies. Here's the plot. In November of 1974, Ronald Jr. killed both of his parents and siblings in Amityville, New York. So Ronald was locked up for his crimes and actually died in prison in March of 2021. 13 months later, George and Kathy Lutz and their children decide to move into the house where people were brutally murdered. Because why the hell not, right? Josh Brolin's father, James Brolin, actually plays George Lutz.
I'm coming apart! Oh, Mother of God, I'm coming apart!
So, of course, evil spirits begin haunting the house. I'm not sure how accurate this movie is to the actual story, but there has been books, documentaries, and even a remake to this film and other sequels. The Lutz family moved out of the house only 28 days after staying there, even though I don't know why the hell they even decided to move in that house anyway. George's son, named Daniel Lutz, actually blamed his father for the house being haunted, saying that he welcomed the spirits due to his interest in the occult. The Amityville Horror was supposed to be a TV film, but got put into theaters instead. The Amityville Horror is a great story adapted into a film. I haven't seen the 2005 remake with Ryan Reynolds, but I'm sure that one's good too. And that remake, like The Omen, also has a curse around it. Number 39, The Fly. When a science experiment goes wrong involving a man named Seth, played by Jeff Goldblum, a fly, and a teleporter, Seth Brundle finds himself transforming into a fly throughout the whole movie. This is a remake of the 1958 movie of the same name. And let me tell you something, when I say this film is nasty, I mean nasty nasty. Like vomit-inducing nasty. Projectile vomit nasty. But with this being the 80s, and also directed by David Cronenberg, you kinda have to expect that. But this pushed the gross out factor to its limits, man. Seth's slow transformation is probably the grossest transformation in all of cinema, with each scene getting grosser than the last. But it also gains your curiosity in a sick way. You're just on the edge of your seat thinking, how much worse is Seth gonna get? Well, if you like body horror, then trust me, it's worth the wait. This is actually a very rare occasion where the remake is more memorable than the original. This remake has gained a cult following for people who love 80s horror, or people who just grew up around that era. This movie actually got a sequel in 1989, though that one ain't near as memorable as this one. I haven't even heard anything about it. There are people out there who regard this movie as an allegory for the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, but that's just weird. Okay, I need to hurry up. I still got a lot more movies to get to. Overall, this remake of The Fly is gross and nasty. It's a good movie, as long as you don't watch it while eating. Not to mention the incredible special effects. They even use an animatronic at the end. Number 38, Jeepers Creepers. While making a trip home from college, siblings Derry and Trish, Derry being played by Justin Long, while on the freeway they get harassed by this crazy trucker, whom they encounter many times on the way home. They encounter him so much that they figure out that this guy stays at an old abandoned church, and of course, dumbass Derry has to go back there while this guy's not around and investigate the church for himself, getting them into massive trouble. This movie is named after a 1938 song, and even plays in the film. This is one of the most memorable horror movies of the early 2000s. Sure, it's cliche, the villain being called the Creeper. Yeah, very creative, right? But it is a good movie. I recommend this if you're just getting into horror as well. This movie got 3 sequels, actually. The second movie being released in 2003, and 3 and 4 being released many years later. I heard 3 and 4 aren't good, though, but I haven't seen them yet. Number 37, Pet Sematary. This 1989 Stephen King adaptation is about a family that moves to Maine, where they meet a local named Judd Crandall. After the family's cat is accidentally killed, Judd suggests to Louis Creed, the father of the family, to bury it in an old grave called the Pet Cemetery to bring the cat back. And it does. But the cat comes back evil. So when the family's toddler Gage dies by getting smushed by a semi-truck, the father decides to bury his son's mangled body in the pet cemetery. And even though he's told not to, he does it anyway. So sure enough, Gage comes back from the dead completely unscathed from the accident, but he's an evil flesh-eating toddler. This film just shows off the brilliant mind of horror Stephen King has. His writing is simply amazing. Most of his stories actually come from his dreams. That's pretty creepy, right? But hey, that's how he made a lot of money. Pet Sematary is a very disturbing and sinister film, but I really like it, and it's one of the best Stephen King stories he has to offer. Number 36, The Exorcist. I hate putting this 1973 horror masterpiece so low on the list, because everyone considers this to be the greatest horror movie ever made. And they're not far off. But like I said, this is my opinion, and my opinion only. The plot is simple. When 12-year-old Reagan plays with a Ouija board, she ends up contacting a demon that results in her getting possessed by it. Her mother scatters for answers, wondering what the hell is happening to her child, but the doctors can't find out what's going on, other than two priests, and they tell her what's going on. So it's up to these two priests to perform an exorcism and get the demon out of Reagan. This came out after everyone thought Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho was bad. But The Exorcist showed how naive their minds really were. The absolutely shocking portrayal of demonic possession in this film was so extreme that people were having heart attacks, passing out, and vomiting in theaters. But thankfully that didn't happen to the cowards that walked out of the film, resulting in ambulances being rushed to the theater and having to hand out barf bags for future showings. Director William Friedkin tragically passed away last year, but he more or less got the reaction he wanted out of The Exorcist. Just as this film is still scary and disturbing today, just as it was back in 1973, is just fascinating. I know a few people who are still scarred by it. This movie also has one of the most infamous deleted scenes of all time, Reagan's spider walk, which was included in the 2010 re-release. The Exorcist, the version you've never seen before. Jack Nicholson and Marlon Brando were originally going to play the two priests, but William Friedkin didn't allow them the job because he wanted to make The Exorcist feel more real by not adding popular actors. To show how groundbreaking this film was, it was nominated for many things at the Oscars, even winning Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Sound Mixing, being nominated for Best Picture, and Linda Blair being nominated for Best Supporting Actress for playing Reagan. Number 35, Candyman. This story by Clive Barker was originally called The Forbidden until being adapted into a film called Candyman. And to make this movie all the more creepier, it's actually based on true events. Candyman is about a woman named Helen who is told of an urban legend of a man who was brutally murdered in the 19th centuries by the white mob, by them sawing off his arm and then covering him in honey where he's stung to death by bees. Before dying, the locals called him Candyman, and that's where he got his nickname from. But after dying, he became a vengeful spirit, and if you say his name in the mirror 5 times, he will appear and kill you. This movie is also a bit of a psychological thriller as well. With Candyman not appearing much, you wonder if he's even real or just a hoax. But when Candyman finally appears with his hook for a hand, you understand that he is very much so real. Tony Todd was so dedicated to the role of Candyman that he filled his whole mouth with bees, getting stung over 20 times. Yikes. I think Candyman is a good film that the 90s has to offer. It's not often that you see a supernatural slasher movie. I think the 90s was when horror started mixing subgenres, which is not a bad idea at all. Number 34, The Ring. This iconic 2002 remake of the 1998 Japanese horror film Ringu was a massive success. This is probably the most iconic horror film of the 2000s. Ringu also got another remake released in 2004 titled The Grudge, which got remade once again 2020. Like Candyman, this is another urban legend horror film.
I saw her face.
After watching a cursed videotape with scary images put into it, you will get a phone call with a freaky voice on the other end saying, "You will die in 7 days." So of course people don't believe the legend and watch the tape anyways, resulting in them getting cursed. This was the first horror movie to actually scare me a little bit. That iconic scene of the girl crawling out of the TV is awesome, and has been parodied over a number of times. I say after watching this movie, you'll never look at TV with static on it the same way. I always like horror movies that make normal things seem scary, and that's the main reason why this movie made this list. Number 33, Fire in the Sky. This 1993 horror movie is the only film on this list to actually be based on a true story. The alien abduction of Travis Walton is still to this day regarded as the most convincing proof that aliens exist. Because the story isn't all over the place, it actually makes sense. While traveling home from work, Travis and his co-workers notice a red glow coming from the forest. Some of them think it's a fire, but Travis insists on them going to investigate to see for themselves. So when they arrive, they see the red glow coming from the sky again. Travis decides to get out of the truck and investigate. And in front of all of his co-workers, Travis is struck by a ray of light, knocking him back 20 feet. Travis's co-workers run away in fear, but when they come back, he's gone, before returning after 5 days, him being severely dehydrated. The real Travis Walton, who is still alive today, said the aliens let him go. You really should hear his side of the story. He's been interviewed many times about it. There's been documentaries, he wrote a book, and I think he even makes a cameo as one of the citizens in this movie. After the abduction, Travis and his co-workers went to the police and actually had the balls to say, our friend was abducted by a UFO. They were forced to take a lie detector test, the county getting the best lie detectors in the whole state, and I shit you not, they passed. They've always insisted on it being true, some of them being brought to tears in interviews by simply talking about it. This is the only movie I've watched so far to scare the shit out of me. I think it wouldn't bother me near as much if it wasn't for the fact that it's based on a true story. Even though some of the movie is inaccurate, like many movies based on true stories, it's still very scary. And if you want a good scare, I recommend it. Or if you're just fascinated with aliens. Number 32, Child's Play. Yes, of course. Can't talk about horror without mentioning everyone's favorite killer doll, Chucky. The plot of this 80s classic is about a little boy named Andy who gets the hot new toy doll, but doesn't know that's possessed by a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
The original title of this film was called Blood Buddy, but they went for Child's Play. This is the only Child's Play movie that I actually like. Child's Play 2 was a good sequel, but not near as good as this one. Child's Play 3 was very dull. The 2019 remake with Mark Hamill as Chucky was a little bit better. I haven't seen Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, Curse of Chucky, or Cult of Chucky, and I'm not planning to see them soon, because I don't think I'll like them. Whoever's the puppeteer of Chucky in this movie deserves a raise. I like Child's Play because as a little kid, I was really scared of electronic dolls that could talk and move. So this movie really understands the fears I've had when I was a kid. And Chucky will probably forever be the most likable horror movie villain. Number 31, Hereditary. I don't remember a whole lot about this movie, other than it creeping me the fuck out. The plot is something along the lines of a grieving family, two parents that have a 16-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter, and they're mourning the death of their grandmother, and the grieving only gets worse when the 16-year-old accidentally gets his 13-year-old sister killed. It's a haunted house film that even involves possession at some point, with them being haunted by the sister and the grandmother and other evil spirits. In a nutshell, this movie is basically if The Exorcist and the Amityville Horror had a baby. But let's cut the shit. This has got to be some of the most terrifying acting performances in horror. The movie doesn't rely that much on jump scares, which is really good. But when I say this movie can genuinely scare the daylights out of you, you better believe me. Number 30, Sleepaway Camp. The plot of this low-budget 1983 movie is about a psychotic girl named Angela who is sent off to a place called Sleepaway Camp, where she can't seem to get along with anybody except her cousin. So she goes on a massive killing spree, killing all the campers. And I know what you're thinking. This movie is just a rip-off of Friday the 13th, and you're absolutely right. That's why it was so criticized when it first came out. But in today's world, Sleepaway Camp has gained a cult following, just like many bad movies in the 80s. Because what's not to love about gory 80s horror? This movie is different from other slasher movies, with most slasher movies being a grown man killing people. In this movie, it's just a little girl. And it's always good to appreciate the fact that the movie is different from other movies. Because with this being low budget, they didn't have a lot to work with. The film was shot in only a month, and they wrapped up right at the end of summer. So capturing the summer vibe was a close call, but they did it. This is definitely a movie you gotta watch in the summer. It fits the mood perfectly. Though I don't hope anyone's summer has to involve with them getting gutted. All of Angela's kills in this movie are very gnarly. She uses just about anything to kill her victims, and she's very good at it. Sleepaway Camp is a good horror movie to watch during the summer. It's just great, gory, low-budget horror. Oh yeah, and that ending. That dreaded ending. Number 29, Terrifier. Art the Clown has just become a horror icon in the past 2 years. And the reason why is that his kills are so extreme that it makes some people vomit and pass out. But not only just that, he really is a good slasher villain. His power is to keep his victims alive so they can feel every bit of pain he's causing them. He's one sick killer clown. He's also a bit of a mime, with not a single grunt or peep coming out of his mouth. Terrifier 1 and 2 reach a savage level of violence that I didn't even know existed. Director Damien Leone doesn't allow the Terrifier movies to be limited in terms of violence, doing it his own way. I heard they're handing out barf bags for the third movie that's in theaters now. Number 28, A Quiet Place. This 2018 horror sci-fi post-apocalyptic movie stars John Krasinski and Emily Blunt as they're trying to survive in the year 2020. Kinda ironic knowing what happened that year. They're trying to survive from these aliens that are super duper sensitive to sound. They're blind, but they can locate their prey with their hearing. They can hear glass break and a gunshot from miles away. They are also super fast. With the aliens all around them, they cannot eat crunchy food. They have to walk barefoot and use sign language. It's a cool movie. Number 27, The Shining. This is not only considered one of the best horror movies ever made, but one of the best movies ever made. The Shining is a Stephen King story adapted to film by Stanley Kubrick, and Stephen King actually does not like this movie. This movie is based on a real haunted hotel that Stephen King stayed in. When writer Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, and his wife and child stay in a hotel alone, Jack's sanity slowly deteriorates as the hotel is haunted. This is a rather difficult movie to understand. Some people theorize that the hotel in this movie actually isn't haunted, and the visions are just made up by the characters. But whether the visions being real or not, it's scary. This story also got a sequel called Doctor Sleep, and that was adapted into a film in 2019.
Here's Johnny!
Jack Nicholson improvised that line, by the way. And like Rosemary's Baby, The Shining was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in 2018. Number 26, Silver Bullet. Stephen King's take on werewolves was way better than I thought it was going to be. This 1985 gem of a horror movie is about two kids with very irresponsible parents, but when their uncle comes to visit and take care of them, they realize that there is a werewolf killing and terrorizing people in the town. And the only way to stop it is to kill it with a silver bullet. There were quite a few werewolf films in the 80s, like the Howling franchise and American Werewolf in London, Night of the Werewolf, and Teen Wolf, even though that's not really a horror movie. The Stephen King novel that this movie is based on was actually called Cycle of the Werewolf, but the movie is called Silver Bullet. And I don't know why they changed the name to Silver Bullet. I guess it just has a better ring to it. There's actually not a whole lot of people out there that like this movie. I consider it to be underrated. And there are many more Stephen King adaptations out there that people hate. I don't think this one deserves it. The story's not complex, it's easy to follow, and it's a great werewolf movie. Number 25, Alien. Horror or sci-fi? Well, why not both? The director of this iconic 1979 creature feature, Ridley Scott, gave birth to the term sci-fi horror, with Alien's slogan being, "In the back of space, no one can hear you scream." Alien is about a space crew who explores a planet called Prometheus, and when one of the crew members gets face hugged by a spider alien, it plants a baby xenomorph in his chest, violently bursting out of him and growing rapidly. So the crew are stuck on their own spaceship with the xenomorph, and they have to kill it. Simple enough. Director Ridley Scott didn't want the horror to only rely on a spooky alien killing people one by one, but he wanted to add an astrophobia feel, which is the fear of outer space. For example, everything just feels so open and large. The atmosphere is very dark, and even the color of the xenomorph is black, until it was changed to blue in Aliens, which is the sequel to this movie. Oh yeah, and I cannot forget to tell you guys, do not watch that chest burster scene while eating. Maybe iconic, but it's very disgusting. The original title for Alien was going to be called Star Beast, until they changed it. Alien is now a popular film franchise, with the latest film being released this year called Alien Romulus, and that was great. Number 24, The Blob. The Blob is a vile remake of the 1958 horror movie with the same name that stars Steve McQueen. The 1958 one got a sequel called Beware the Blob, but this 1988 remake unfortunately did not. Which doesn't make any sense, because the ending of this movie kind of sets up a sequel in a sense. But with this being a remake, it bombed at the box office. But it still met with positive reviews. The guy who helps write A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 also went on to help write this remake. The Blob is about a massive goo from outer space that invades a town, and it consumes people so it can get larger and larger and larger. And when it comes to special effects and horror, this is where it's at. When the Blob consumes people, their bodies melt and fall apart in a very gross manner. And for creating the Blob monster, they got a bunch of silk bags, then they filled it with methyl cellulose and another thickening agent put into it. Overall, this is one damn good remake. Number 23, House of Usher. This 1960 film adaptation of the 1839 story by Edgar Allan Poe stars Vincent Price and Mark Damon. The original story was called The Fall of the House of Usher, while the movie is just called House of Usher. And I just realized that there is a Netflix series called The Fall of the House of Usher, and that is also based on the 1839 story. House of Usher is about a man named Philip who goes to a mansion searching for his fiancée so they can run off and get married. But her brother Roderick, played by Vincent Price, is trying to stop them from getting married due to a family curse caused by the mansion that they are living in. So if they were to get married, then the curse would pass on to them and their children. So it's more or less for their own good. You really need to watch this movie for yourself. It reminds me a lot of The Shining. It's not near as creepy as The Shining, but the whole haunted mansion and everything gives me that vibe, you know? The gothic element added to this film is also very appealing. In 1961, Mark Damon won a Golden Globe Award for Most Promising Newcomer for this movie. It's also tragic to mention that Roger Corman and Mark Damon died in May of this year. Roger Corman was supposed to be like the king of B movies. He got many directors in Hollywood their jobs. You really need to watch this movie for yourself, because it really is a good horror movie. And I haven't seen a whole lot of horror from the 60s, but this one is really good. Number 22, Insidious. Alright, we're back with another haunted house film. This 2011 film revolves around two parents whose lives fall apart when their son Dalton goes into a coma. So after Dalton goes into a coma, the family's home becomes haunted. So they make the smart decision, unlike any other horror movie family, and move out of the house. But when they move to their new home, the entities have followed them. That's when they realize the house isn't haunted, it's their son that's haunted. See, somehow Dalton has this ability to leave his own body with his soul, and one night he goes out wandering so far that he contacts a demon. So the demon traps Dalton so he can possess his body, and then the parents call help. It's a good movie with frightening scares, and I recommend it. Number 21, Halloween 2018. I'm probably going to get a lot of shit for saying that this is my favorite Halloween movie ever, but that's okay. Because this is how you perfectly revive a franchise after years. This reboot cancels out every movie past Halloween 2, which is great because every movie past Halloween 2 sucks, except for the Rob Zombie ones. This is my favorite Halloween movie because the story is so well done, and this feels grittier than the other Halloween movies. This movie takes place years after Halloween 2, where Laurie Strode has a daughter and granddaughter, and Michael Myers breaks out of the institution after rotting there forever to hunt Laurie Strode and the rest of her family down. This movie also has a lot of callbacks to the original 1978 Halloween. That's why this is a perfect reboot. This movie also got 2 sequels called Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. Halloween Kills was okay, but Halloween Ends was god-awful. This could have been the perfect conclusion to the Halloween franchise, but of course they had to make sequels. But this is still a great movie. Real quick, I would like to talk about the original 1978 Halloween. 3 actors played Michael Myers, one of them being Tony Moran, and I had him sign my original poster up there. But the 4th actor is supposed to be John Carpenter. Remember the scene where he punches through the closet with his knife to get to Laurie Strode? That is supposed to be John Carpenter, but this is only a theory. It's not a fact. I really should have asked Tony Moran about that. Number 20, The Mist. The Mist is a 2007 adaptation of the 1980 book written by Stephen King with the same name. This is about a group of people who are trapped inside of a grocery store when a strange mist invades their town. But it's not the mist that kills people, it's what's in the mist that kills people. The movie also comments on human nature, how people are driven to evil by fear, letting us know that the only monsters in this movie are insect-like creatures, but are human beings, flesh and bone. And it is good when movies comment on the real world. Most of the monsters in this movie are just mutant insects. They come in all sizes, small, large, and colossal. So the fear factor is doubled in this movie if you're scared of bugs. This movie also probably has the most gut-wrenching ending in movie history. Number 19, Event Horizon. To me, this is sci-fi horror at its best. This is about a spaceship called the Event Horizon that's been missing for years, but afterwards it randomly appears out of nowhere. So a space crew decides to board the ship and investigate, only to realize that the ship has been to hell and back, literally. While on board, the crew is attacked by evil forces and they get shown frightening imagery. The original cut for this movie was actually going to be more disturbing than the film turned out, if you can believe it or not. Event Horizon is one of the scariest depictions of hell ever, and it's in outer space. Number 18, The Bride of Frankenstein. This sequel to the 1931 original was the first sequel Universal ever produced. This follow-up's right after the events of the original, where Dr. Frankenstein is suffering the consequences of the creation of his monster. Dr. Frankenstein is now under the authority of his former mentor, Dr. Pretorius. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Him and Dr. Frankenstein have to make a wife for the monster so he'll stop terrorizing people and killing them.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Okay, I guess the monster is called Frankenstein in that scene, so that's where everyone gets it. Dracula actor Bela Lugosi was offered the role for the monster in Frankenstein, but he turned it down, so Boris Karloff came in. But due to his health conditions, not long after, he could no longer play the monster, which is really sad because he really missed that role. He always said that monster was like a friend to him. He did play in House of Frankenstein, but not as the monster. They wanted Bela Lugosi to play the role of Dr. Pretorius in this sequel, but it never happened. This is my second favorite gothic horror movie of all time, and don't worry, we'll get to my favorite. The Bride of Frankenstein is a great horror sequel that's better than the original. Let's move on. Number 17, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Well, who didn't see this coming? Nightmare on Elm Street is debatably the most famous 80s horror movie. Surely everyone knows the plot to this one. A group of teens are being hunted down in their dreams by a burned man with a fedora and knives for fingers. His name is Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger and his rival Jason Voorhees are probably the most iconic villains in horror history. You don't even have to like horror to know who Freddy is. Hard to imagine while in production of this film, they were going to make Freddy Krueger silent. Yeah, Freddy Krueger being silent, imagine that. They wanted to follow the tradition of other horror movie villains, but they didn't. Not to mention, this is Johnny Depp's first role in cinema. Out of all the popular slasher villains, Freddy is probably the hardest to survive, because everyone has to go to sleep eventually. And when you're asleep, he can do anything. A Nightmare on Elm Street is good, but the sequels are not. Wes Craven's New Nightmare was okay, and the remake is good. Number 16, White Zombie. This atmospheric 1932 film is about a witch doctor played by Bela Lugosi who has the ability to control the undead and make them his servants. When a desperate man named Charles stumbles across the witch doctor, he tells him of his issue. So the witch doctor's solution is for Charles to kill her so she can come back as a zombie and then she'll be controlled into marrying him. But of course the witch doctor doesn't do it for Charles. He does it for himself so he can have another zombie slave. White Zombie is considered to be the first full-length zombie film, before George Romero revived the genre in 1968 with Night of the Living Dead. White Zombie was actually inspired by a Broadway play by Kenneth Webb titled Zombie. Kenneth Webb sued the movie for copyright infringement, but he did not win his case. White Zombie was shot in 11 days on a budget of $50,000. It's surprising to see Bela Lugosi, a big horror icon, do a low-budget film. It's funny how he did this, but he turned down the role for the monster in Frankenstein. However, he did admit that he regretted taking on this role. His salary for the Zombie Master was only $800. Without this movie, there would be no zombies. Legendary director and musician Rob Zombie named his band after this movie, White Zombie being one of the most popular heavy metal bands in the 90s. Some scenes from White Zombie actually appeared in other films, like Tim Burton's biopic of Ed Wood. Not to mention that Bela Lugosi was in some of Ed Wood's films, and I bet he got an even lower salary for those than he did in White Zombie. But Ed Wood's a completely different conversation. Number 15, Hellraiser 2. This is where the list gets really good. Hellraiser 2 is a sequel to the original 1987 Hellraiser, and is even better than the first. The Hellraiser movie is about a group of demons called the Cenobites that are summoned by opening a strange box. Their leader, called Pinhead, is my favorite horror movie villain, next to Jason Voorhees. Now this one actually takes place in hell, unlike the first movie. Hellraiser is based on the book by Clive Barker called The Hellbound Heart, and like Rosemary's Baby, the movie was released only 1 year after the book being released. I like Hellraiser 2 better than the first because Pinhead and his Cenobites are more present, and it has a little better scares in it. Hellraiser 1 and 2 are the only good Hellraiser movies. Number 14, Dawn of the Dead. Not talking about the 1978 sequel to Night of the Living Dead. I'm talking about the 2004 remake to it directed by Zack Snyder. It's probably controversial me saying that I like the remake to the most infamous zombie movie of all time. But this is just how I feel. I like the remake because it's more action-oriented, the kills are nicer, and the characters are not complete idiots. Like in the original George Romero one, the zombies can't run, so if you use a lot of common sense, you're not going to get killed by them. But in this one, the zombies run, making it harder to survive. I'm not shitting on George A. Romero at all. I like the original 1978 one, but I just like this one better. I think he even helped write the script for this movie. And for some reason, the original 1978 Dawn of the Dead is hard to find on Blu-ray and DVD. It's not available to stream anywhere either, which that really blows. However, there's a YouTube video that has the whole movie on it for free. Number 13, Scream. Based on actual events, this 1996 movie is what revived the slasher genre. This movie, while being a horror movie itself, comments on other horror movies. It's a meta slasher. It also spawned 6 sequels. Wes Craven's new non-supernatural slasher villain is called Ghostface. He's an identity adopted by each killer in the movies. So the plot of the Scream films are simple enough. They just gotta figure out who's behind Ghostface in each movie. As seen in the intro of this video, I have a Scream poster that is signed by Nancy Ann Ritter, Jamie Kennedy, and Skeet Ulrich, all cast members of the first Scream. To me, this is Wes Craven's masterpiece, and one of the best slasher movies out there. I recommend it, and Scream 2022 and Scream 6. Number 12, Brain Dead. Also known as Dead Alive, this fun, ultra-gory zombie film was directed by Peter Jackson. This was his second movie that he made after Bad Taste. This was way before he made the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And let me tell you something, calling this movie violent is an understatement. Zombies' guts and blood spill out all over the place. Even a zombie's intestines come to life at one point. Like, fuck me. Oh yeah, and this being a zombie film, the humans will not be spared the horror at all. I think this is the goriest movie I've ever seen, and it's probably the goriest movie on the planet. But that's one of the reasons why it's so good. It's just so over the top and funny. Okay, I'll finally explain the plot now. A man in his early 20s still lives with his overprotective mother, and when him and his girlfriend go out to the zoo, the mother follows them there, and she's bitten by a rat monkey, so yeah, pretty goofy, and that turns her into a zombie, biting other people and infecting them, and turning the whole town into a zombie apocalypse. It's a good movie. Number 11, Horror of Dracula. This is one of the earliest examples of a reboot. Horror of Dracula was the first Dracula movie to be in color and have proper sequels. It was also the first Dracula movie to be a part of the Hammer films. Terrence Fisher was the best director Hammer Film Productions ever had. He wanted to bring back the old 1930s horror movies and make them in color, like Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy, and make them more explicit. So in the late 50s and early 60s, Hammer horror reigned supreme. Horror of Dracula is also known as just Dracula. The plot to it is not that much different than the original 1931 Dracula. Vampire hunter Van Helsing, played by Peter Cushing, goes up to Count Dracula's castle, played by Christopher Lee, to put an end to his madness. Both Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee went on to be in the Star Wars movies. Peter Cushing was Tarkin in Star Wars A New Hope, and Christopher Lee was Count Dooku in Star Wars The Prequel Trilogy. And with it being the same actor, I'm pretty sure this movie is where the name Count Dooku came from. Christopher Lee also went on to play Sauron in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Christopher Lee is the most menacing Dracula to me. Horror of Dracula is absolutely my most favorite film from the golden age of cinema. Number 10, It. It's time to talk about Stephen King's greatest story. This is the movie that made me fall in love with horror. It is about a clown named Pennywise that lives in the sewers of a small town called Derry and feeds off of the fear of children by shape-shifting into what they fear the most. The original one was released in 1990 and it was made for TV, and that one's okay. With it being released for TV, the biggest problem with it is that they couldn't show the true horror of Stephen King's novel. But this one is way scarier, even though it's not quite as disturbing as the book. And if you're afraid of clowns, it's even worse. I'm not afraid of clowns, but Pennywise is terrifying, thanks to the good acting of Bill Skarsgård. The biggest difference between this one and the 90s version is that this one is split into two parts with a sequel, while the 90s version is just 3 hours long, showing both the kids and the kids in adulthood. Everything about this movie is just great. The acting, the story, Pennywise, it's amazing. Number 9, Creepshow. This 1982 film directed by George A. Romero is based on the comic book by Stephen King with the same name. This is the only time I know of where George Romero has stepped away from zombies. This movie is also written by Stephen King since that he did the comics. So Creepshow is set inside of a comic book and tells us 5 different stories. The first story being about a family's grandpa that comes back from the dead to kill them. I guess that is zombie oriented. The second one being about a meteor crashing on Earth that covers everything in grass, and even a person. And the man in that story is played by Stephen King. The third story is about a man kidnapping a man and a woman, drowning them and filming their deaths, only for them to come back and kill them. The fourth one being about a werewolf-like creature inside of a crate. And the fifth and final one being about a man dealing with a very severe cockroach infestation. Creepshow also got a sequel released in 1987, but that one's not directed by George A. Romero. It even got a threequel, released in 2006, but I don't think that one's official. Creepshow also got its own TV series released in 2019, so Creepshow is a bigger deal than I thought it was. This is one cool horror movie. It's unique how it doesn't revolve around one massive plot, but multiple short stories. It's colorful and bright. The stories and scenes transition via a page turning and a panel swapping, just like a comic book. Number 8, Friday the 13th Part 6. Jason Voorhees, the slasher king of Camp Crystal Lake. He is not only my favorite horror movie villain of all time, but one of my favorite villains of all time, period. The reason why I like this Friday the 13th more than the others is because I think Jason has the most screen time in this movie, making it more entertaining. And all the kills are great, obviously because he's Jason Voorhees. And to all you newcomers to the Friday the 13th franchise, Jason wasn't the killer in the first movie, it was his mother. Part 2 was his debut film, and even then he didn't even have his hockey mask. He ran around with a bag on his head. Finally, in the middle of the third movie, he got his hockey mask, and every movie after that he had it. The first Friday the 13th actually had a strange influence from the original 1978 Halloween, with that one not having a whole bunch of blood in it. What they wanted to do with Friday the 13th was add a whole lot of blood in it. Like bloody as fuck. Number 7, Sleepy Hollow. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you gothic horror at its best. Being influenced by 1930s horror and the Hammer films, and also after failing to make Superman Lives, Tim Burton decided to direct this 1999 horror film with his own notorious dark visions. And he goes all out for this one. Sleepy Hollow is dark and atmospheric as fuck, which is one of the reasons why I like it so much. It's probably the most visually appealing horror movie I've ever seen. This is based on the 1820 novel by Washington Irving, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But as for the film, they just went with Sleepy Hollow. Tim Burton's take on the Headless Horseman is amazing. I'm not sure how accurate this movie is to the book, but the basic plot seems pretty accurate to me. A local officer named Ichabod Crane, who is played by Johnny Depp, is told to investigate a bunch of bodies with their heads chopped off. Crane suspects that it's a serial killer, but the townsfolk thinks it's tied to the legend of the Headless Horseman, which Crane doubts, and he ends up being wrong, of course. The real-life legend of the Headless Horseman is very famous, the myth being about an evil spirit of a soldier who lost his head in battle while he was riding on his horse, and every Halloween night he comes back to reclaim his head. Sleepy Hollow without a doubt deserves to be in the top 10. It's my favorite gothic movie. Number 6, The Blair Witch Project. Being released in 1999, this found-footage horror movie is the most terrifying indie film out there in my opinion. The Blair Witch Project is about a group of 3 students, Heather, Mike, and Josh. They go out in the woods to film a documentary about the Blair Witch. When they're out there, freaky-ass shit starts happening. We can only assume that it's the Blair Witch. There's actually a theory to this movie that there is no witch. This movie is terrifying, and it doesn't even have any jump scares in it, which are the best kind of horror movies. The found-footage videography is what makes this movie so terrifying. And it's also that you can't even see the Blair Witch. You're scared of what you can't see. The Blair Witch Project was a huge hit when it came out, making $248 million at the box office on a budget of $60,000. Now that is awesome. This is a movie to watch multiple times because you catch a lot of things in it. Number 5, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like Scream, this movie is based on actual events. This 1974 classic was the debut of the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface. I've always loved the idea of chainsaws being depicted as weapons. Just the idea of slicing your victims to bits with a motor-powered saw is so foul. Director Tobe Hooper, who was born in Texas where this film takes place in, died in August of 2017, sadly, but he did a damn good job with this movie. This movie is about a group of teenagers who go out on a trip in the countryside and stumble across a family of cannibals. Just your average plot of a slasher movie. Many say the 2003 remake of this movie is better, and it is a good movie, but that one doesn't have near as much dread as this one does. The gritty atmosphere of Texas in this movie is so appealing and effective, and the sound that Leatherface's chainsaw makes gets your anxiety going. This movie is like a Western horror, which is a great idea. With Texas Chainsaw Massacre being filmed in the Texas heat, shooting it was a freaking nightmare. The cast and crew had to work 16 hours every day. Due to the film being low budget, the cast had to wear the same clothes every single day without washing them. The reason why they weren't allowed to wash them is because the crew was afraid that they would tear up or lose their color. While filming inside the slaughterhouse, the smell was so bad that when the director would yell cut, the cast would find the nearest window, stick their head out, get some fresh air, and vomit. Despite the tough shoot, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a great pick for movie night, and the rewatch value is very high. Number 4, The Evil Dead. Before The Evil Dead, Sam Raimi made a movie called Within the Woods. He says it's supposed to be a prototype to The Evil Dead. It's only 30 minutes long. It was released in 1978. Like many films on this list, this was a very low-budget movie, only being made by a group of friends. After the release of Within the Woods, Sam Raimi gained $90,000 from it, which was a decent amount of money to start producing The Evil Dead. So Sam Raimi and his friends drove out to Morristown, Tennessee to film the greatest splatter movie ever. The original title for The Evil Dead was actually going to be called Book of the Dead. While walking out to the middle of the woods, they stumbled across a creepy cabin which was perfect for The Evil Dead to take place in. They actually stayed the night in that cabin during filming the whole movie, which was no easy task. The conditions of that cabin was terrible. A lot of the crew members had to sleep in the same room. The cabin had no plumbing whatsoever, and at night it would get so cold that they would have to burn some of the props to stay warm. Even though The Evil Dead was painful to shoot, they wrapped up filming and the movie was released in theaters, and it was met with great reviews, earning Sam Raimi a great reputation. He then went on to direct other films like The Quick and the Dead and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man trilogy. Okay, I'll stop nerding out now and finally get to the plot. Thank you for your tolerance. The Evil Dead is about a group of people who go out staying in a cabin in the middle of the woods. When they arrive at the cabin, they search the basement and find a Necronomicon, also known as the Book of the Dead, with a cassette tape of it next to it. So when they play it, it chants out a demonic prayer, resurrecting an ancient group of demons called the Deadites. One by one, the Deadites possess them. But they don't call an exorcist, no, they hack them to pieces. This movie does not shy away from blood. Number 3, House of a Thousand Corpses. Alright, we're in the home stretch. Rob Zombie's first movie is also his masterpiece. Released in 2003, House of a Thousand Corpses is about a group of people who are left stranded when their car runs out of gas and has a flat tire. They come across a house full of evil redneck hillbillies, where they meet terrible fates and get tortured. The Captain Spaulding character adds humor into horror. He's played by Sid Haig, rest in peace, and he is my favorite clown in cinematic history. I've talked about this before, but Rob Zombie is not only a filmmaker, he is a musician. And the good thing about being a musician and a filmmaker is that you can compose your own music for your films. Rob Zombie's influence for House of a Thousand Corpses did not only come from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hills Have Eyes, but from his parents' work at the carnival. That explains Captain Spaulding and the wacky filters in this film. Before becoming an amazing artist, Rob Zombie worked on the set for Pee-wee's Playhouse. I like Rob Zombie's music, but I like his movies more. House of a Thousand Corpses is definitely one of my favorites. Number 2, The Thing. This movie right here is John Carpenter's masterpiece. The Thing is a 1982 sci-fi horror movie about a group of scientists that are at their research facility during a snowstorm. When they come across a guy shooting at a random husky, they save the dog and take it in where it's safe. But they don't know that the husky is a deadly shape-shifting alien that can also infect people. So it's a whodidit kind of movie, like a murder mystery, but it's non-stop entertainment from start to finish. You will never get bored with this movie. The special effects show how much this movie was ahead of its time. This is the greatest special effects I've ever seen put to film, and I mean that. Now, people barely know this, but this film is actually based on a book called Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. This is not the first adaptation of the book. There was a movie in 1951 called The Thing from Another World. Universal wanted to produce another Thing movie that's more faithful to the book. Thankfully, they got John Carpenter to direct, because he's a huge fan of the original. And once seeing the original Halloween, you can see it playing on a TV. The fact that people are still analyzing this movie after years shows how awesome it is. Number 1.
You don't know me, but I know you. I want to play a game.
Yes, this one. This movie right here. The original Saw from 2004. This is my bacon and eggs, my cookies and cream, my bread and butter, you name it. This is about 2 men that wake up in a bathroom with their legs chained up. They're part of a sick game of a serial killer named Jigsaw. One man is named Adam, the other man is named Dr. Gordon. The only way for Dr. Gordon to be free is if he cuts off his leg, grabs the gun off of the dead body in the middle of the room, and kills Adam with it. Jigsaw puts his victims in traps based on the bad things they have committed in their lives. Upon release, it was criticized for being too similar to the David Fincher movie Seven, but I think that's stupid. And with this movie being a massive success, it spawned many sequels that are way more violent than this one, causing people to vomit and pass out. Saw was made on a budget of $1.2 million, and at the box office, it grossed over $100 million. Pretty big deal for James Wan's first movie. Saw was meant to be a straight-to-DVD release. I bet James Wan is glad that didn't happen. The idea of Saw came from when James Wan was suffering from migraines. He thought for sure he had a brain tumor. So James Wan was thinking about what he would do for the rest of his life if the doctor gave him a limited time to live. And that idea led to the creation of Saw. Pretty interesting, but very creepy. I could go on about this movie forever, but it's time to wrap this up. Saw just had its 20th anniversary like 2 days ago, and it's back in theaters as we speak. I really hope you guys enjoyed the list. There's not many people out there like me who enjoy horror movies, so I really want to build this channel on horror, not video games. And don't worry, I will still play many video games. I just wanted to do something different for Halloween. But I really hope you guys enjoyed the video like I said. Happy Halloween, watch out for werewolves and vampires. Good night, everybody.